Hello, my curious archaeogastronomers. Thom here. This is the Delicious Legacy Podcast, and I'm your host. Welcome back to another delicious adventure. Today we're exploring the foods of the island of Rhodes in the southeast complex of islands called Dodecanese. The terrible ring and thunder of the Ottoman artillery and cannon, the mortars and the mines beneath the giant stone city walls, was shaking the smoked city of Rhodes for 6 whole months. A siege of a massive force, nearly 200,000 soldiers and 400 warships, was attacking the Knights Hospitaller under the command of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, perhaps the most legendary Ottoman ruler of all time. The earth was rumbling with falling walls. The massive fortifications constructed over decades by the Knights of the Order of St. John that made Rhodes impenetrable had now a gaping hole. Surely the end was near for the few surviving ironclad defenders. It is December 1522 and the Sultan's vast army has breached the final defences. Bloodied and exhausted, the defenders laid down their arms at last, marching out of the city with honour as the banners of the Ottoman Empire rise above the smouldering ruins. After more than 2 centuries, the Knights of Rhodes are no more. Their next chapter would unfold on the island of Malta, where in 1565, they would defy Suleiman once more in a siege even more legendary than the last. Meanwhile, Rhodes entered a new era under Ottoman rule, forever shaped by the legacy of the warrior monks who had transformed it into an unshakable bastion of the medieval world. That, of course, is only a small part of the history of the island of Rhodes. The biggest island of the Dodecanese complex and a place of trade in the Eastern Mediterranean for more than 3,000 years. The island is also famous for the Colossus, of course, the Colossus of Rhodes, and many famous men of antiquity, athletes and philosophers and politicians and historians. As such, it's a place of rich, complex and layered gastronomic history too. The inhabitants of many of these Dodecanese islands, in the southeast of Greece, like Karpathos, Kos, and so on. But mostly, and more importantly, the inhabitants of Rhodes had always have a connection with the coast of North Africa, one that goes back to the Rhodian presence in the commercial center of Naucratis on the Nile Delta in ancient Egypt. And they were one of the 9 Greek city-states that had connection to this major treaty port and commercial link with Egypt and the West. Much later, after the Byzantine Empire, the Knights of St. John, as we said, conquered Rhodes in the 14th century, and they established a powerful fleet to protect both the island and its commercial interests, among which was a hefty trade in spices, procured mainly from the nearby Egypt. Rhodes exported cardamom and many other aromatics to Western Europe. In recent times, the last couple of centuries, the ties to Egypt have been equally strong. Many of the islanders emigrated to Alexandria or moved back and forth between the island and the island homes and work, mainly in the city of Alexandria in Egypt. Rhodes is a rich and fertile island, even today obscured by the hordes of visitors, around 4 million, who descend on the island each year. Rhodes' rich past self is still a shining wonder. The old town, on the island's capital, is one of the best preserved medieval cities in Europe, marked by beautiful old winding streets, the castle of Grand Masters, which was completely renovated by the Italians later on, and dozens more 14th and 15th century edifices. And people actually live within the walls of the old city. That's the beauty of it. In contrast with the rest of the Aegean islands, what perhaps marks her differently is the frequent use of certain spices, such as cumin, which one also finds readily in the cuisine of the nearby eastern Crete. Also, sesame seeds and sesame paste, tahini, play a greater role in the Dodecanese than elsewhere in the Aegean, perhaps owing to these islanders' continual contact with Egypt and the Levant. Some sesame is still cultivated on the island of Rhodes, and you can see little golden pyramid-shaped bundles of it drying at the end of summer. Tahini breads and pies, like those found in Cyprus, are made also in Rhodes during Lent. There are also tahini soups and sauces for fish and some very unusual dishes for sweetened tahini and pasta. Souma is a fragrant raki. I know all of you have opinions about raki and grappa and ouzo and tsipuro and all those types of spirits from Greece. But this raki from Rhodes is quite unique. It's a very fragrant one. And, of course, it's up to you to love it or hate it, deny it or embrace it. But it has a very specific, unique characteristic. And it is that it doesn't give you hangover the next day. For the drinkers of Souma, the word hangover does not exist in the dictionary. Its flavor, it's reminiscent, of course, of the well-known raki. It is, in a sense, the same thing, but the aroma is very characteristic of the grape variety that is used to make Souma. And like raki, it's colorless. And if you add water to it, it's not going to get cloudy like ouzo. But adding some water and some ice is necessary because it's quite strong spirit. So Souma is very endemic in the island, and it's only produced in the village of Ebonas, which is in the mountain Ataviros, the tallest mountain of Dodecanese, in the west side of Rhodes. And so at the same area, there are the vineyards of the two big companies that produce wine in the island. So the cool climate, because of the altitude, also the westerly winds and these microclimatic conditions, they help the vineyards to give a unique produce. This in combination with the soil, which is granite soil, and there's a lot of moisture and dampness in the soil on that side of the island. It creates a unique and an extremely unique quality of grapes, which has an amazing flavor. At the end of September and the beginning of October, it's when the harvest of grapes is happening in Rhodes. The fruits are collected in a large basin and they're cleaned from the twigs by hand. Then, this clean now product has been pulped with the help of a large wooden stick. The liquid that's produced then is boiled in the traditional kazani, which are these copper distillation cauldrons called kazania. And that's where the process of tsipuro as well as raki is happening. And then it gets into barrels, and then these barrels are kept in a cool and shaded place. And when Souma is bottled and it goes into our fridge in very low temperature, the Rhodian Souma is ready to drink. Of course, it's autumn when all this procedure and process happens, and the days growing shorter. The tourist period is long gone, or about to finish. So the families, they gather around in the winemaker of Ebonas, and they have it for private use. While the Souma is produced, distilled, there's a fantastic party happening with lots of mezedes and dancing, which signals the beginning of winter. In ancient times, Rhodes was one of the biggest wine exporters in the region, going back as far as the 7th century BCE. The first written reference we have for Rhodian wine comes from the great Athenian orator Aeschines, a rival of Demosthenes, who was exiled in Rhodes in 330 BCE. In a letter, he says that he stayed in a small house with a garden in the area of Camiros. and that his friends treated him to olive oil, honey, and a wonderful wine that was far superior to that of Athens. Which is what would you have said, too, if you were kicked out of your city and wanted to flatter your hosts. Mountain Ataviros, in 1,215 meters high, is the center of Rhodes' grape-growing heartland, a beautiful Natura 2000 protected area with verdant valleys, pine forests, and the cypress forest in Embonas, which is a designated natural monument. The best vines grow at an altitude of about 650 to 700 meters. The vineyards are low yield and are exposed to the Aegean strong northerly winds that moderate the high temperatures and provide a favorable climate for high quality grapes. The island's main varieties are Athiri and Amoriano, together with two muscats, the Petit Grains, the small berried, and the Ditrani, a clone of muscat introduced by Italians from Puglia. In the limestone-rich soil of Ataviros, there are Athiri vines over 70 years old, growing from their own roots rather than from American roots resistant to phylloxera. And as the spread of the pest in the Dodecanese stopped at Kos and never reached Rhodes, which I find quite interesting and surprising. The vines made from the old Athiri vines are like a completely different variety. They stand the passage of time very well, acquiring a more concentrated and layered character. And 5 years in the bottle transforms them to a smoky wine with an impressive mineral presence. Rhodes' wine industry is intrinsically linked to the acronym CAIR, which is Compagnia Agricola Industriale Rhodi, a winery established in 1928 by a group of Italian investors. This winery was responsible not only for keeping the grape cultivation alive, but also making Rhodes one of the few wine-producing areas in Greece whose vineyards expanded after World War II. The company came under the ownership of Boudozakis Group after the Dodecanese Islands became part of Greece, the Greek state, in 1947. In 1957, it was sold to the Dodecanese Association of Agricultural Cooperatives, and basically Cair became wildly popular as a sparkling wine producer, with its Velvet and Rosé Reserve labels, constituting impressive examples of complex sparkling wines. And before Greece's middle classes discovered important champagnes, every bottle of Cair was, according to an old advert, a cause for celebration, and annual sales had reached 1.5 million bottles. For several years now, the company has been focusing on quality still wines as well, such as the Rhodes 2400, which was launched in 1992 to celebrate the 2400 years since the founding of Rhodes Town. You are listening to the Delicious Legacy podcast by me, Thom. There's more to come after the break, and it gets better. A traditional dessert from Rhodes is Melekounia. It's a heavenly taste. They're made from honey, sesame, almonds, and spices. And it's the main offering in weddings. And the main objective here is to send the wedding couple and the guests to high heaven. Of course, they're very similar to pasteli as well, another well-known Greek dessert and Cyprian one. But these Melekounia have a better taste because of the lovely spices. This traditional custom, it goes back 150 to 200 years. And the production starts a few days before the wedding. So all the relatives and friends of the bride and the groom, they're gathered in a house and all together they make these desserts. Only just before the procedure has been completed with the cutting of the desserts, and while they're still in the hot honey in the basin, hugged by the sesame and the spices, the whole gathered party, takes a bit of the mixture and spreads a bit onto the bride and groom to be. And of course, this is for good luck and happiness for their future married life. Many families up to today, they keep this custom because it's fun, obviously. And it has another party thrown onto it. Oh, in the old days, instead of wedding invitation, they used to send a small rhomboid piece of Melekounia as an invitation. The ingredients are carefully selected. The ingredients have to be the best. The ratio between honey and the other ingredients has to be exact, because this will give the texture and the chewy mouthfeel. The sesame has to be the best sesame. It has to be very carefully roasted. Same goes for the almonds. And these are roasted in the oven a little less or a little more, depending how dark the customer wants them to be. The sesame is washed in a basin and they let it dry for 3 or 4 days in the winter or 1 day in the summer. Then in a saucepan, we'll roast it for about 10 minutes. Then in a saucepan, honey and sesame has been cooked together for 10 minutes, so it doesn't get too tight and it has a bit of a lovely, soft, chewy texture, as we said. And this ratio is 1:1, 1 kilo of sesame to 1 kilo of honey. And then the lovely, fragrant spices come in: clove, nutmeg, cinnamon. And depending when the weddings are and what the season is, there are, of course, some citrus fruits available to go, either a bit of orange zest or mandarin or bergamot. Then all this mixture from that saucepan has been poured into some special tins called signa, which they're round in shape, and they spread this mixture from all over with a specialized rolling pin. And then in the end, they put the roasted almonds. Other products of the island include olives called elies nerajates that are obviously cured and then steeped in the juice of bitter oranges. It is a favorite flavoring in several islands in the southeastern Aegean and also in Cyprus and Crete. But in these islands, there are small green olives usually the candidates. In Rhodes, there are many different kinds of olives that are perfumed with this bitter orange juice. And usually they are early harvest green olives, ripe black olives, and slit greens, to which hot peppers and wild fennel leaves are also added. They sound like a great meze. Zoupes is the local name for wrinkled black olives in Rhodes. Zoupes are basically an end of the harvest black olive, so they're very mature and shriveled, that they are salted with coarse salt and thus processed cured until the olive's own mahogany juices are completely exuded and the olive begins to exude their oils. At this point, they're seasoned here with dried savory and with a strong musky, incense-like leaves and berries of the skinus bush, the pistachio lentiscus, which is a relative to the mastic tree of Chios. You are listening to the Delicious Legacy podcast by me, Thom. There's more to come after the break, and it gets better. Another very interesting thing about Rhodes that I don't think we've seen or we encountered anywhere else in Greece is the use of the tender leaves of the cyclamen flower called little camels, which are used as dolma wrappers, both in Rhodes and in Isyros. And also the bulbs of the cyclamen, they are cooked in syrup and made to a spoon sweet in Rhodes. So basically, they get boiled a few times, so they will get rid of all the bitterness, the excessive bitterness that it has, and then it will be basically peeled like quince, and then basically made to a spoon sweet. Another specialty of Rhodes, which I don't know if it has to do with the English Knights of St. John that they were in the island, the Knights Hospitaller, but like apricots, medlars are also cooked into a paste. It's a rare sweet nowadays, found only in some remote villages. But yeah, medlars, again, something very old, traditional English, and something that is lost from English cuisine too. So some other traditional dishes from Rhodes, it's chickpea fritters. So basically little pies called pitaroudia. And of course they are made in other Dodecanese islands too. Depending on the local dialect, they have different names. But Rhodes' most renowned recipe for chickpea patties is served on many restaurants and taverna menus, especially in the island's capital and in other major city like Lindos. But off the tourist trail and in the backwaters and mountain villages of this beautiful Lush island, home cooks make fritters from onions, grated potatoes, courgettes, and or ground meat. All have one thing in common: the use of cumin, by far the island's best loved spice. And unlike small meatball-sized chickpea fritters elsewhere in Greece, and of course very different from the Egyptian falafel, the Rhodian version calls for big, plump, filling patties. Another very usual and loved food, mainly in the mountain villages of Rhodes, is called lopia, and basically is this mix of goat meat with beans or chickpeas, which are slowly cooked together in a traditional village wood fire oven for many hours, and that's a very delicious slow cooked food, basically meat with pulses. Lakani is probably the most characteristic dish, local dish of Rhodes, and it's been made with the most beloved ingredients. So goat meat, chickpeas, fat bulgur, and cumin. And this is made in a similar way to the previous dish I mentioned. So you soak the chickpeas overnight, you put them in a big pan or oven dish, and on top you put the goat meat, tomato sauce, and the spices, cumin and cinnamon, salt, and fried onions in a clay pot. All this in a clay pot, and we add water and we cover it, and you put in the wood-fired oven for at least 3 hours. I mean, just describing it here, I'm salivating. I think that's a fantastic dish. Stewed greens are common in many Greek islands, especially in Crete and part of the Ionian. And this is a strictly seasonal dish made in the summer. And one of the favorites in Rhodes is amaranth and purslane stew, which both grow profusely all over the countryside. So the normal thing to do is to use some olive oil, onions, garlic, amaranth, and purslane, ripe tomatoes, maybe some small courgettes, juice of fresh lemon, and yeah, you have your stew. It's a very traditional, delicious stew. Another favorite is the tahini pies, so made in Lent usually at the village of Archangelos, which are flattened, coiled sesame paste pies, similar to a recipe found in Cyprus. And obviously, they attest to the many similarities between Cypriot and Dodecanese cuisine. Tahini pies were traditionally grilled on the bottom of a wood burning oven, but nowadays are more likely to be grilled in a non-stick skillet or griddle pan or so on. They are the traditional sweet on Clean Monday, the first day of Lent for Easter, but also make a great breakfast food, which I happen to eat a few times, yeah. There's also sweet tahini bread, and there's also whole fish baked with tahini sauce, where you use a large fish such as grouper or a snapper, and basically a bed of onions, garlic, tomatoes on top and bottom, white wine, and tahini to make the sauce and bake the whole thing in the oven. There is also tahini soup with tomatoes, orzo, and lemon, which again, it's very simple, very old Lent fare, and something that you would eat probably every Wednesday during the autumn and winter times. And yeah, it's simple, delicious, and tahini-licious. A favorite thing to use in many different dishes is sivrasi, which is onions caramelized in olive oil. So basically, it's a practice that the onions are caramelized and then used usually to be served over pasta or flour-based creams, greens, legumes or pulses, and even in cheese pies. So basically, it's very very popular, very much the garnish of choice in Rhodes, which you don't really find in other places in Greece. And yeah, it's called sivrasi. And this is it for today, my lovely archaeological astronomers. I'll see you next week with another adventure. This time we'll go to Central Asia, and I will leave it there. I'll let you ponder what it will be. But yeah, I hope I gave you some ideas and some inspiration for dinners this week, and some delicious gastro-tourism destination for you for next spring-summer. Perhaps Rhodes and Kos and Karpathos are on the cards. I've been Thomas Dinas, and this was the Delicious Legacy Podcast. Remember to rate and review the podcast wherever you get it from. And remember, I love you more than slow-cooked pork and cabbage stew. Bye!